So here we are for a webinar on the topic of moving on from being a founder-led organisation delivered by the FSI. So this webinar is a part of the Small International Development Charities programme, but we did open it up to organisations working anywhere in the world, because obviously this is a topic that applies to any organisation. It just happens to be funded by FCDO under this programme. As part of the FCDO funded programme, for the rest of this year, we've got a number of other free trainings. We've got one coming up on child sponsorship if you're considering moving away from this model. We've got one on annual accounts and statutory reporting. We've got a whole load of on-demand recordings from previous trainings on safeguarding, monitoring and evaluation, lots of fundraising topics. We've also got some free e-learning courses. Those two down there that I've done on kind of a 101 introduction to small international development charities, and then a furthering of that on the topic of good practice in development. You can find out everything that's on offer at the FSI's website. There's a specific page for the SIDC programme. So this is a webinar format today. So once I've finished going through these slides, I'll get rid of them and we can all just see each other. I think that's much nicer. We can use the chat function. And also if you've got questions, feel free to use the raise hand function. And you can raise your real life hand as well, if you would prefer to do that. So we have a learner portal at the FSI where any resources will be shared. We don't have presentations from today because people, Gabby and Tom and Carla, who are going to be talking to us, are just going to talk to us and not be faffing around with presentations. So there won't be much in there for you as a result of this session. But if you've been to previous trainings, there'll be some things in there. So we're live. Well, it says we're live streaming. Don't worry, we're not being cast onto the internet for everyone to see. That's just our closed captions at the bottom of the screen that you'll see if you've chosen to have those coming up. We do ask for you to fill in the pre and post event surveys because this is an FCDO funded program. Anybody who's had any funding from FCDO will know that we have to report back to them, and so we're using the deposit and the evaluation forms as a bit of an incentive there. We'll see how we do for time, but we might have one short break after we hear from Gabby, Tom and Carla before we go out into some breakout rooms to have a bit more Q&A and just to discuss as peers. Feel free to connect with each other and share your email addresses, your LinkedIn names, or any other information. So to get the best from today, please do participate. I know it's tempting with a large group just to sit in anonymity, but if you've got a question in your mind, chances are somebody else is thinking it too. And so do put yourself out there and ask that question, not just for yourself, but for the group as well. Stay in touch with each other, use it as an opportunity to connect with peers who may be facing similar situations to you. As I mentioned, this is a safe and confidential space. Obviously, we are recording, so if you do want to ask a question confidentially, you'll need to drop me a message in the chat. And just some reminders about being courteous to your fellow participants. So just on waiting your turn to speak, not speaking over each other, and being aware of how much time you're taking if there are other people with lots of questions and hands up too. So we've started introducing ourselves in the chat already. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to, there we are, we can see each other. So I'm just reading through some of the chats, sorry. Oh, great. So there's a real nice mix here. We've got some founders, we've got some people working with founders. So hopefully this will be a useful session for everyone. I'm going to introduce Gabby now, who's our first guest speaker. Gabby, I'll let you do your full introduction because I'm sure you'll do it much more thoroughly and naturally than I would. But Gabby Eldin from Bloody Good Period, over to you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Yeah, fab. And just if I could just make a request that if anyone has questions, I'm not going to look at them until the end. I know some people sometimes like to ask questions mid-talk. I find that really distracting. So I'd be very grateful if you could maybe just save it and then maybe copy and paste. But it's lovely to be here. I'm Gabby Edlin, and I'm the founder of Bloody Good Period, and I'm not quite sure what to call it yet, but soon to be founding CEO, which is not quite as catchy as it could be, but that's because I'm not actually leaving BGP for another 2 weeks. But Vic has asked me to come and talk about leaving the organisation I founded while I'm still here, because hopefully I can offer some valuable perspective into what it's like to be in the midst of leaving and how I made the decision to hand over. And crucially, what I think I would have found really useful is a step-by-step how I did it. And I know we're not sharing the presentations, but what I'm really happy to do, if anyone would like to, is I will pop those bullet points in the chat. So everyone's welcome to just hold on to them and keep them if they're of any use. But first, some context and some history. So I started Bloody Good Period in October 2016 after learning that the asylum seeker drop-in centre that I was about to volunteer at didn't supply period products to the visiting clients, nor did any other drop-in centre throughout the UK. So for those of you who don't know, asylum seekers are people who fled war, trauma, and come to the UK seeking safety. They are given, it's now around £40 a week to live on, which, as you can imagine, hardly covers a food shop, let alone period products, which can cost a quarter of that. But it was also a near impossible task for these often volunteer-led and fund-restricted centres operating in the UK to buy and store enough products for often hundreds of women and menstruating people. And it's almost hard to believe, given where we are as a society now, but just 5 years ago, periods were not something that anybody wanted to talk about. And so very few places had even considered period products as an essential need. Now, at this point, I had never worked in a service-focused charity or anything period related. I was working in the arts and I was a nanny, but the need was really clear, as was the method. Ask people what they need and find a way of getting it to them. So I decided to create an intervention that would support these brilliant services at the same time as challenging the silence and stigma, which, as you all know, is so often associated with a perfectly healthy bodily function. I posted a status on Facebook and I asked family and friends to donate period products for me to take to this drop-in centre. And within weeks, I was so overwhelmed with products from people I'd never met, who had heard about it through other people, that I began to reach out to other centres to support them too. And it became clear as I talked to more and more centres that a sustainable service was required to support the people that they worked with. Because although some organisations were giving an emergency pack or a few pads here and there or a tampon there was a stark lack of infrastructure that matched the actual need for products, i.e. every month, every bloody month we have periods. And so rather than just be content with a small project that would rely on my own capacity and generosity of people that I knew, I began to turn what would soon become Bloody Good Period into an organisation and eventually a registered charity with volunteers, team members and trustees. 5 years later, we're a small to medium-sized charity with a clear working strategy, a team of 12 paid staff, a board of trustees, tons of amazing volunteers, a thriving education programme, award-winning comms and branding, a subsidiary company, Bloody Good Employers, and a leading voice in both gynae and menstrual health and how to do charity differently. The charity is no longer in startup mode. And in the past couple of years, my job has shifted firmly away from founder to CEO. I'm no longer the ideas person or the one setting everything up or driving a vision. In fact, I have a highly capable, brilliant team who do all that and more. And so it's time for me to go. I had always assumed that I'd leave BGP because I had absorbed a real fear of founder syndrome early on. But I expected to stay around for 10 years, maybe 7 years for good behaviour, but not 5.5. I honestly, though, could not have told you where that 10-year number came from. I'm pretty sure I just plucked it out of thin air. I don't think I would have been able to tell you how I would know when that time was. It's now been over 7 months since I made the decision to step down as CEO, and it has not been an easy journey. And although the process will be different for everyone, I thought it might be helpful to take you through mine, especially as my decision actually came as a bit of a surprise to me. After guiding the charity through the worst of the pandemic and emerging kind of out of the other side, I had begun to enjoy my work less and less. I found myself facing new challenges with overwhelming fear rather than excitement and a can-do attitude that I was used to. And also embodying some classic toxic imposter syndrome traits. I assumed that this was all because I was a terrible CEO, rather than really actually someone who just had more to learn and was also really quite exhausted. But what this newfound discontentment did tell me eventually was that I just simply was not enjoying the work anymore, and that was really okay. So how did I leave? I'll take you through, because I'm a bit of an organizational freak. I've numbered it all, and as I say, I will let you all know, I'll let you all have this list if it's helpful to you. So how did I leave? Number one, I talked to a couple of trusted friends in the sector. So before talking to anybody else, I just tried out saying it. I said to a couple of people who I knew really well, really trusted, who also were in the charity sector, I think I'm going to leave, and just listen to what their responses were and what it sounded like. At the same time, I took some time with them to explore options. Was leaving the only thing for me to do? Was that the only way that I would start to enjoy working again? You know, could I bring on a chief operations officer? Could I restructure the staff? How would that feel? I eventually decided, no, it was time for me to go, and I was really happy and proud of that. And so we took some time to celebrate and to talk about the brilliant achievements of BGP so far. Following that, I talked to my chair of trustees. I'm really lucky to have an absolutely fantastic chair who is also, aside from being extremely passionate and talented, is really brilliant at organisational management. So I talked to her. She wasn't surprised at all. She said she knew it was coming, which I suppose is the mark of a really excellent chair. And so we took our time. We decided to plan, and we took 7 months for me to leave. It would have or could have been longer, but I had pretty much decided on my successor. We were really lucky. I'll talk a bit about that later. And we made a plan. I really love an Excel document, so I meticulously planned who I'd tell and when and how. And as I mentioned, we decided on a succession plan. Would I remain in post at all? Would I become a trustee or an advisor, be in an advisory capacity? I chose not to. I think the mark of a really good founder is someone who can step away and who can trust the people who are doing the work and will continue the work to do it really well and do it in line with your vision. And I think that's always a really good time to know when it's right to go, if everybody is on board, especially if you have senior management who really know how to push and keep that vision going. So I will be stepping away completely. And again, with my chair of trustees, we took some time to celebrate. We talked about how we started together. We talked about our favourite moments. We talked about the massive successes. And we also talked about what we'd learned. Number 3, I took a break because I didn't want to leave exhausted. It was autumn 2021. I was extremely tired. I was basically burnt out, as I think anybody who is leading a small frontline charity in the pandemic will also say. And I didn't want to leave angry, and I didn't want to leave overtired, because I didn't think it would do the work justice. So I took a month off after Christmas. I also got married in that time, which is not a requirement for anybody else, but that was me really taking time away to do something for me and my husband, obviously. Number 4, I gave my second in command, Rachel, a chance to take over for a month with full knowledge of the situation. So leaving the charity that you founded is a long game, as many of you will know. And the key is hiring people who you believe can take over, and then taking the time to instill them with the confidence to do it, bringing them into the top level budget discussions, trustee meetings, team management, really showing them that they can do what you do. And that might be hard for your ego sometimes, but it's really, really important. So what we did was, my chair and I, who at the time had only told the rest of the board of trustees, we gave her my role during 6 weeks of my time off, just to see what she thought of it, to see if she liked it, and also for the team to sort of see how they thought. And when I returned in February, we had a chat and she accepted the role going forward. So again, that was a really big celebration. And then I turned to my meticulous Excel sheet and started to tell the team one by one within a week. I wrote out notes of 5 bullet points that I was going to make sure to be able to talk about and answer. I made sure to meet them all in person wherever possible, and I thanked them specifically for their work. Number 6, we planned the communications, again, meticulously and on Excel. And the thing that I found the hardest was allowing other people to write about me. So allowing my chair and my successor, Rachel, to write basically the communications about why I was going. I also found it incredibly helpful, and I think quite necessary, to write an exit letter as well, so that just really people could see it from my point of view as well. This is not a chance to tell all, or to tell people the sort of gritty bits of how to run an organization and how to lead an organization. This is really the time where you get to instill your supporters, your funders, and your team with confidence that this is the right move. And if anyone is interested in reading mine, it is on the Bloody Good Period blog. And something I'm really, really proud of. I then told funders, number 7, I called them personally, or I emailed them and offered a call. And what happened for the most part was that I just received a really lovely email back saying, we're really happy for you, nothing else needs doing. A couple of funders need reassurance, which is absolutely fine. Often they just want to know if they're mid-fund, that the strategy is not going to change, that nothing else is really going to be a big shift to their donation. And then number 8, we told our partners. So we told the people that we work with, we told all the centres that we donate products to, that we provide education to. We wrote in advance, or I wrote in advance, a really carefully written personal email that would make sure that they would have no worries about the future of the service, that nothing was going to change, but if they wanted to, they could give me a call. For the most part, no one will really worry that much or give you a call, but I think people really appreciated having that service available. And this is probably a good time to say that once we had started to hand over to my successor, to Rachel, that's when my job really became about leaving, and our jobs as CEO started to merge a bit, but I started to hand over a lot of the team management work and the sort of strategy going forward, fundraising, that kind of thing, because leaving is a job in itself. You really need time. I've taken 3 months to do it. Finally, we told volunteers and supporters. We asked people for stories, and as you're probably noticing now, we celebrated. We talked about all the brilliant things that we've done, and we asked people to tell us. And number 10, which I think deserves a sort of point in itself, even though I've just talked about it, is celebrate. We will be celebrating as a team, we'll be celebrating with our audience, with our donors, with our followers, all of that, with our partners. Charity work is really, really hard. And when I wrote this, hilariously, my autocorrect wanted me to say charity work is really, really rewarding. And it is that, but I think it's okay to accept it's incredibly hard work, and it's especially hard founding something original and pushing boundaries. And so that really does need to be celebrated. And with all of this, of course, is the handover. As I mentioned, we gave ourselves 3 months for this really important job. It is admin heavy and it is boring, and you are downloading out of your head everything that you've ever known and everybody you've ever met. But it's really crucial to build confidence in your successor. And it's also worth mentioning, though, that through all of this, there was so much fear. And for me, guilt showed up a lot because I had, as expected, not managed to achieve everything I had said I wanted to. I, for example, didn't think I was really allowed to leave until our campaign for free products for everyone who needed them was up and running. Nobody had told me this. Nobody had said that's when you can leave. That was just something that I realized was something that I had told myself. But what I have learned is that the whole point of founding something and creating this overarching vision and mission is really to inspire others to continue the work. And often us founders don't pick up on that obvious piece of news. Rather, we see it as a task that we must fulfill, bestowed upon us from the gods of activism or justice. And this is, I think, often mistaken as being ego-driven. But I'm sure you all agree with me as founders that it's not really. It's often just really big guilt. And so what we need to do in this situation is not admonish ourselves for holding on, but rather give ourselves permission to let go, because those brilliant people that we might feel guilty about having to do the work, we can just let them do the work and let them do it really well, and we can walk away. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Gabby. That's fascinating to hear how it's worked for you, and thank you so much for being honest and sharing it. And I know you've been honest very publicly about all of this, and I think that's really brilliant. And I think you're really right about that feeling of guilt, and I've spoken to people who really feel that. So we'll have a bit of time now for some questions for Gabby. So Gabby can stick around and answer some questions. So I can see a few things pinging up in the chat, but if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
I have a question then, please. Thank you very much, Gabby. How many staff can your charity employ?
We have 12 people working for us in a paid capacity. About a third of them are freelancers.
Yes, my problem, you see, is that our charity can only afford 2 staff. So I'm not quite sure how to, as it were, induct a successor, because there's no funding for a 3rd person. I basically feel I'll have to carry on as CEO, but for free, so that the person who will take my role will be able to be salaried while she's learning or he's learning the job.
I think the key here is really to talk to your funders or your donors, because having an unpaid CEO is really unsustainable. It doesn't help anybody. It's completely exhausting. As you will know, it can just completely drain you. And it also, I don't think, gets the best from somebody, because if you're also having to work as well alongside running a charity, then the charity is not going to get the best of you. So I think it's worth having, if you have donors or you fundraise from people, I think it's worth having conversations out loud and openly, asking people for in your sort of sector where you should be fundraising for particular roles. There is core funding always available if you just keep asking different people. We're not a sort of we're not really funded by sort of these huge grant making organizations. It's smaller places, and often it's a risk, because you're only able to do contracts for year on year. But I think it's worth talking to those people, because the really important thing about doing charity work is that it's sustainable, because the worst thing that you can do is end up letting the people down that you provide the service for. So that's what I would suggest in that situation. Make it really, really clear to funders if they don't understand why having an unpaid CEO is just not sustainable.
Thank you.
I think what you touched on, Gabby, as well, about how this is a long game. You know, this could take months, could take a year. So Marion, if you're thinking, okay, the time has come and we want to do this, I suppose starting to put those irons in the fire now with funding applications and securing enough unrestricted income to allow there to be a period of crossover. So let's say that you thought, okay, it's going to take me 3 months to hand over. We're going to need to be able to have 2 of us simultaneously in this role. Perhaps planning that for the end of this year, the beginning of next year, but giving yourself that lead up time to be able to have enough money in the pot to have those 2 roles simultaneously so that you're not having to work for free.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question that they would like to put to Gabby?
I saw in the chat as well.
Yeah, I can see.
Well,
did someone start talking?
More of a worry that Sally was saying, I'm a control freak. My fear is that charity will fail or change beyond recognition. Yes, same, Sally, but that is no reason to stay on, unfortunately. And I think part of that is really trusting the people that are working with you to not let it fail. I don't think anybody wants a charity to fail. They may decide that it needs to change in a certain way, and that is okay. We can't found these things solely in our image and expect them to stay that way. So I would just feel the fear and crack on anyway, really.
I just comment on that. I mean, financially is another problem for us. Like, I can't remember the name of the person that said it before because everybody keeps moving on. Was it Marion?
Yes.
Yeah, like I'm unpaid. I'm retired allegedly, and I'm unpaid, and we struggle from month to month just to keep people housed. I don't know where we'd find the money to pay someone to do what I do. That's my problem, really. I think if I knew that we had funding for someone to do it paid, I know somebody, on people that does part-time work for us, and I would be delighted to take it on, but getting money these days is really tough.
It is, but it's doable, and I think about being honest and vulnerable with your funders and talking to them about this, whether again that's people or that's companies or that's actual sort of trusts and foundations. But I think it is really just making that a priority, and really looking into how you can do that, sort of what Vic was saying before about it being a long game, it being something that you have to just make a really long plan for. Like, you might not be able to go for a year, for 2 years, and that's okay, as long as you know that you'll be able to go. Funding is incredibly hard to come by in this sector, but it is there, and it just depends who you talk to, and putting yourself out there and asking to be introduced to everybody, you know, and that dreaded word networking. But also finding ways that you can, if you're fundraising for a certain project, making sure that you're putting in contingency as well and overheads. So basically saying, well, this is going to be a project that we'd like to run, but for a certain point, this will also include a handover to a different person because I will be leaving as founder, that kind of thing as well. It's about sort of, it's either about finding that magic funder, which it is possible, finding that person who really wants to help you transition over, or it is also, or both, about finding little ways that you can bring that money in to do it bit by bit, I think. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Gabby. I think the funding is going to be a sort of crunch point for a lot of people on the call. So when we get to our kind of breakout rooms and more broad discussions later, we can definitely come back to that and think about some ways of resolving that. Clementine, I can see you got your hand up. We can't hear you, sorry. I don't know why. It doesn't say that you're muted, but we can't hear you. Now it says you're muted. Oh, it says you're muted now, Clementine, sorry. Okay, she's going to log out and come back in. Okay, thanks. Bridget, did I see your actual hand going up a moment ago. Were you wanting to ask?
Yes, it was. We're a small charity in this country, but we actually support a charity in Africa. And the problem there, I mean, Gabby was obviously willing to fully hand over, but we have a founder out there who, although she's technically retired, is on the board of trustees and is really still wanting her position and very influential. And we're finding that a wee bit challenging.
What's your question?
How can we encourage her to fully let go and let the new person running it change things really and bring in fresh ideas, fresh ways of doing things? Yeah,
it's really hard when the problem is that the founder won't let go. But I think it's always worth. Is she the chair?
She's not the chair, no, but she's very influential.
So it's very much the job of the chair, I would say, to have these conversations, and that means that you could maybe have those conversations with the chair, but it shouldn't ever be on the staff to try and make something like that happen, because I think it's risky for you as well, or for the volunteers. I would have a conversation with the chair. I think there are certain ways of going about it in which you can be quite subtle, and you can say thank you, thank you for all of your service, and giving someone, sorry, I've got a plaster on my foot, I was trying to take it off, it's probably not the best time. Giving someone, like I said, permission to go. It may well be that there is a lot of fear of who she will be separate from the charity, what her sort of standing, I guess, will be being separate from the charity, and maybe sort of what somebody else voiced before, what will the charity look like without her? Will she still be able to, will the charity still have the vision that she intended, and what if not? And I think all of those things are really important conversations for the chair and the other trustees to have with her. And again, really slowly, it can be very much over time. It may even just be worth sort of, mentioning, you've been to this talk. Is it time to think about a succession plan? Thank you so much for your service. Like, how do we go about it? Almost sort of play dumb with it. That's something that I would certainly do. How do we now talk about your succession plan? I realize we've never talked about that before, and all of these quite like really careful conversations, so as not to hurt anybody's feelings, because I think it's a difficult thing to leave one's charity, but it's also a responsibility. And so, there are always ways, I think, to talk about it. But yes, as I said a few times, it's really the job of the chair to be able to do that. And so it might be worth sort of you having a conversation with them and starting to get that ball rolling in various ways. You'll know them best, either subtly or quite openly.
Thank you.
Clementine, you're back in. Should we try again? And then Andrew, I can see you've got your hand up as well.
Hi, yes, sorry about that. So I wanted to ask a bit about how you went about deciding what kind of profile you were looking for the new CEO. It's tempting often to look for someone that's quite like oneself, but I think in my case, that's not the right thing. I think someone could bring a really different set of skills. Did you have a process for deciding that specific, both personality type and also skill set?
Really importantly, they cannot be like you. That's the point. And you're absolutely right, because you don't want a founder. You don't want somebody who, especially when you're moving from that founder to the person straight after the founder, you don't want someone who's going to come in and shake up everything. It's really bad for team morale. It's not great for funding. It's not great for any sort of continuity, really. So really, you want somebody who is really adept at the things that you might not want to continue doing. For me, that was team management and long-term relationships with with funders, for example. I know I'm talking loads about funders, so I didn't expect to. But for me, it was really important that it wasn't somebody with the same type of personality as me and the same skill set as me. And that's one of the reasons that we employed Rachel, who was our comms and public fundraising director 4 years ago, because she offered something that I didn't have. And then we complemented each other really well. And now she's been able to sort of take over really in a really smooth way. I think you're absolutely right. You probably want to write down all the things that you don't want to do, or the reasons you're leaving, and find someone who loves that kind of work. I really think that's sort of the key. But it should also be someone who you like. I'm not saying it should be someone who's completely different to you. It should also be someone with the same values and the same way of understanding the mission as well.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Andrew.
Hi everyone. Yeah, just I've got two questions really. One is just to observe that I wonder, for those who are running very small organisations, where perhaps that reliance on the founder who's still working and running the organisation may be greater than those medium-sized organisations with staff where the workload is shared. I just wonder if that it makes this conundrum become even harder. And certainly the way I've approached this in our organisation is to ask the question right at the very beginning, do we want to go on? Because that's also an option that the charity does close. Now, we've gone through that exercise of asking that question and we've said, yes, we do. But I'm also very aware of 3 organisations I've been quite close to that have collapsed and closed in an awful way, and the founders fallen out with the trustees, and there's been a lot of pain and dissatisfaction and sadness around closure. So to me, that is an option. That, I mean, perhaps the very title of this course presupposes that, but it is an option. But if it is one that we consider, it should be done properly, and the closure should be good. You know, it can be managed well. And for me, if that was to happen, I think it would be celebrating all the good work that's gone on, and it was valid, and it was good. The fact that it isn't going to go on in the future is not necessarily the end of the world. So that was my first point. Second point is, Gabby, I'm reminded of Bob Geldof after he pulled off Live Aid. His question was, is that it? And I just wondered what next for you after having founded this amazing organisation, and it's been your entire life for all those years. What next?
Thanks for that. And I agree. I think closing a charity does not have to be a failure, by the way. I think you can celebrate having done this work for this amount of time. Because if it isn't sustainable, like, you're all hurting yourselves, really, carrying on. And yeah, I mean, our raison d'etre is to close. It is important to close for us, because then we will have done the job that we intended to do. But yes, sorry, to your question, what's next? A break, a couple of months off, doing nothing. And then I'm planning on setting up a consultancy service for purpose-led organisations, so charities, social enterprises, helping them with their communications, their strategy, how to talk to the people that matter to them, be that both the people who use their service and their funders, followers, audience, because I think there is a huge amount of excellent work out there, and if you're not naturally a communicator, you're probably doing yourself out of, you know, a really good amount of support and funding. And I want to help people with that, basically. That to me is really exciting, to be able to go into, especially like a small organization, and say, right, let's find a way to communicate this to the people that matter. So that's what I think I will be doing next.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gabby, and thanks, Andrew. We'll definitely come back to this topic of being, you know, super small and volunteer founder CEO. I think that's a situation that lots of small charities find themselves in. And I think, as Gabby has said, it's a long game. And unfortunately, I have seen situations where founder CEOs who are volunteers are 15 years in and they really wish they'd have been gone 5 years ago. And then they're just at the point of exhaustion and they don't want to wait another year or two to be able to go. And that's really the point where we don't want to be seeing people getting into. So we can definitely talk a bit more about that. And Tom from East African Playgrounds, or formerly of, should I say, is going to talk next. And hopefully that's going to be able to give us some insights into how to approach that in the super small context as well. So before we move on to our next guest speaker, does anybody else have any questions for Gabby? You can pop them in the chat if they come to you. Gabby might be able to stick around for a bit, but she may have to get back to important work. So it's
sorry, I've got to go.
Oh, no, well, it's been incredibly helpful. And thank you for being so honest and open and sharing your learning with us. If you are happy to share your bullet point list, if you pop it in an email to me, I can put it on everyone's learner portal, and that'll be the easiest way of doing it. But yeah, big round of applause. Thank you, Gabby. Really appreciate your time and best of luck. And let us know how we can find your consultancy when you do it. Drop me an email and let us know where to look out for that.
Well, yeah, okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I will pop my website here, obviously, because I am control freak. I've already set that up. But please go ahead and have a look, and the consultancy stuff will be on there soon, and I will send the bullet points over. But thank you all for the really interesting questions as well. And thanks for having me.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. So next up, we've got Tom and Carla Gill, who, again, I'll let them introduce themselves more thoroughly, but in brief, they set up an organisation called East African Playgrounds, which is now called Play Action International, and are now not involved anymore and have managed to hand the organisation over very successfully to different leadership. So they're on different screens, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their experience of moving on from founder-led. Tom and Carla, thank you.
Awesome. Morning, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, shall I go first, Carla?
Yeah, go for it.
So we were hoping to be in the same place today, but work has meant we've had to be in different places. But I know Gabby's gone, but I can only echo pretty much everything Gabby said in her half an hour. She's obviously doing a fantastic job, and it isn't easy. It is difficult. There's difficult decisions that have to be made all along the way. And I think Andrew, his last question at the end, is really pertinent to doing this, is the handover question. Do we carry on at all? Do we hand over to a new CEO? Do we hand over to another organization? There's so many different ways of doing this. So I think the way we're going to do this is I'm going to give you a quick story about us and what we did and how we did it. And then Carla's going to jump in with just some of the tips and advice that we have that hopefully helps a few of you. So yeah, East African Playgrounds was the name of the organisation we ran. Very short summary of it. We effectively started when we were at university, and we started out with an idea of building playgrounds in Uganda. And 10 years later, we ended up with a vocational training centre that trained former street children in welding, building, cooking. We manufactured over 150 playgrounds a year, working for every major INGO in the refugee camps. I think we ended up with over 100 staff running psychosocial NLP training in refugee camps, as well as teacher training and play-based educational learning. So we went from a very small idea to a relatively medium-sized organisation. And then where we are now is we don't do it anymore. So it's somewhere along those lines, we handed it over. And for us, the story starts with the handing over right at the very beginning. Before we actually started the charity, we spent 11 weeks with 11 founders in different charities around East Africa. And the idea was we would learn how to do it. And what we actually learned was what not to do. Because most of the 11 organizations, we met really resentful founders who'd been there too long. or really resentful staff working for founders who had been there too long. And what generally was the thing we found just in the person was these charities had started to fly and they were doing amazing, and at some point something happened and they were on their way back down. And the founders essentially had stayed there too long on their development bell curve. We did loads of research in the beginning about founder syndrome, and we always knew from day one that we would not be doing this for the rest of our lives, and that at some point we'd be handing it over. Saying that didn't make it any easier. Even knowing from day one that that was the plan, it didn't make it any easier. As Gabby said, you know, the fear of failure, the fear that you've done something wrong, the panic that it might all fall to pieces when you leave, and the guilt that you're walking away from something that you've put so much time, effort, and love into, and that people might judge you for walking away. Maybe you haven't finished it the way you wanted to. So, you know, if you're looking to move on, those are feelings you're going to have, and don't be surprised when they turn up, because they are there, and it's only natural and human for any of us to have those. Essentially, we from the off had that as our idea, and always knew that that's what we wanted. But from the minute we decided that now was the time to actually hand over, it took us somewhere between 2 and 3 years to actually make the full transition out. So sorry to tell anybody in here if they were looking for a real quick fix. I can't give you a quick fix. It did take us time. And I'm not going to give you a bullet point list, but Gabby's bullet point list was fantastic. What I can go through is the areas that we focused on to build the organizational strength, so that it didn't rely on us so much so that we could move away. The first one is just phenomenally boring. Most people just can't stand the word governance, but the reality is that trustee board is vital. We put time and effort into finding the right people, but once we had them, utilizing them well, and ensuring that there was connection between the board of trustees, the staff on the ground in Uganda, the staff on the ground in the UK, that was all connected. And we made sure that we were the go-between between all of these places, so that once we were pulled out, the relationship still existed. The next one was fundraising. A lot of small organizations have their founder as the focal point for fundraising. We saw this early on, and it took us a long time to pull mine and Carla's. You won't see mine and Carla's face anywhere on East African playgrounds or Play Action International, because we tried our hardest to not be a face, to not be the core fundraising unit, and spreading that responsibility between different team members in the UK, Uganda, and elsewhere that we work, to make sure that the fundraising was not just sustainable in spreading the types of fundraising, but sustainable in, if any part of the team left, the fundraising still went on, the relationships were still held. Next thing, again, really boring, but my take on things is that exceptional people are fantastic, but they tend to move on. Exceptional systems and processes are really boring, but they're there forever. So we invested massively in our systems and processes so that anybody could effectively come in and run the organization. Even if we only found average staff, the organization still had the systems and processes that it could work and function, so that when we did find exceptional people, they could really fly. And the next thing was making sure the programs did what we wanted them to do. They were high functioning in the highest level, understood by all, and that the programs didn't need the work. So when the new CEO we were handing over, they were being given something that was already fully formed, proven, and working. The next thing was the team. So in all of those different areas, fundraising, governance, systems, processes, programs, if Carla and me were the focal points in any of that, then it was going to be really hard for us to hand over. So we made sure that when we were doing talks in front of the Ministry of Education, it was our Ugandan team doing it, not Tom and Carla. When we were doing big fundraising talks and holding fundraising relationships with DFID or donors in the UK, it was never me and Carla, it was always the fundraising team. Now, it wasn't always that way. It did take time to kind of pass that over, but eventually it meant we had a very autonomous team who were bought into the organization, and they had their roles within it, and they could flourish throughout that. And if they flourished, the organization did. And the very last thing was making sure the strategy didn't come from Carla and me. We worked on a theory of diversity of thought. which meant that all of our strategy work was done with almost every staff member or someone from every level was involved, including the trustees. So it meant the strategy was owned by the organisation, not dictated to by us. Once we had that in place, we started the process of trying to leave, which is really hard. We looked at, I think, Andrew's point was, do we carry on? We did look at that. Do we carry on? We were a fairly large organisation, but it's a challenging fundraising environment, and we decided it was right to carry on. And then we looked at how could we carry on? Should we partner with a large organisation? Should we merge? And we did actually go very close to merging with another organisation. It did fall through, but I do believe merging for smaller organisations like we were, or even smaller, is definitely something that needs to be looked at. And in the end, we actually found, didn't go with the merge. We then started focusing on finding the right CEO to take on the organisation. And as one of the answers earlier was finding someone different to you, Carl and I were fortunate. We're two very different people with different skill sets. But what the organisation looked at was a CEO that the strategy needed. So what the organisation needed, it didn't actually have anything to do with me and Carla. It was to do with what the organisation's plans and strategy needed, the type of person that they brought in. We did have a advisory say in who came in, but we very much didn't make the decision of who came in. That was left with the staff and the board, and it was only we had a non-vote position on interview panels. And then essentially someone came on. We did the systems and processes. It was working without us. They came in. We did a handover period with them. Forget how long, probably 2-3 months. And we've always been on the end of the phone for anyone at the organisation. But we took a completely clean break. We're not trustees. We're not ambassadors. We're not advisors. They can use our image as much as they want, but they don't, because, well, look at me. And so we let them go for it. And the organisation is, I believe, stronger for the fact that we took that clean break. Now, I've said that's what we did. None of it was, nothing's easy. Nothing worth doing is easy. But that hopefully gives you a little bit of a story of how we managed to do it and those areas to focus. I'm going to hand over to the much better half of the partnership, Carla, who's going to run through some advice that we've kind of found easy, things we've found have really helped us when we've gone through this journey, and stuff we tell people who are going through similar things. So over to you, Carla.
Thanks, Tom. Hi everyone, sorry I joined a little bit later. I currently work for another charity, so I'm trying to fit in time to join you all. It sounds like Gabby's talk was really, really useful and amazing. So apologies if I do share similar things that Gabby did, but just go with, you definitely should do that if I do. So I think it's really interesting listening to Tom talk because as you tell that story, you're like, oh yeah, that was just so breezy. That just happened. It was not breezy. It's hard work. And I think that's something that's, that's the journey that we ended up on. But we had lots of different plans. There was different entities of where we were going to go. As Tom said, we looked at merging, and we really went quite far down the line onto that. We were about to sign with it, and we then decided it wasn't right for us. So I think, it's always lovely talking in hindsight about things, but I just kind of want to just sort of reiterate and just really see it's hard, but you'll get there. And actually, being the other side of it, it is amazing to see the journey that you've taken. And for me and for Tom, we really deemed success of the charity to be when it was running by someone else. That's, for us, that was a real big key, was to say, actually, we've stepped away, we've created something, and it's carried on. So that's sort of what really drove us to go through it all. But as Tom said, I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the advice that we often give out to people that are going through this situation. That sounds quite dramatic, doesn't it? Through this change. So I think, first of all, coming to a session like this did not exist for us. So surrounding yourself by people that have either done it before, people that are experts in particular different areas, that's so exceptionally helpful, because everyone's path will be completely different, but you'll be able to pull on different ideas of, okay, well, that happened, what if this happens, and different scenario planning to be able to work through. So for us, we surrounded ourselves in experts in different areas. So experts in HR, so we could support our staff as we were going through this journey. You know, accountants, so we, you know, had a real good understanding of what the financial impact could be. We surrounded ourselves with as many people as possible, and actually having, you know, this could be quite a group to support one another through a transition, and everyone will take a different path, but that's okay, because that's what makes the world go round. Other piece of advice is around your ego. Now, when you're a founder of an organization, it becomes part of who you are. You are the person that has risked loads of stuff. Whether that's time with other people, whether that's financial, whether, you know, whatever that might be, you've put a lot into this. So there's a huge amount of risk that you have put into it. And so that fear of failure can be really, really huge. Whatever you deem as failure can be really, really huge. Your identity is often really, really intertwined with that. Tom and I would never get birthday presents from Tom's grandma. We'd get a check for East African Playgrounds. You know, it was very tied up to who we are, what we did. You know, people talked about us, talked about East African Playgrounds a huge amount to us. It was completely our identity, and that might also be the case for you. And so actually taking some time to step back and really think about, okay, well, who am I without this organization? If you feel like you've become so much part of it, who am I? How do I exist without this entity? Or can I exist next to this entity as opposed to within it? So I'd really have a good think about your ego. And one key thing someone said to me is, whether you're running the charity or not, you will always be the founder. And I thought that was a really nice way of saying, like, it's okay, you will always be part of that story. You created that, you are part of it. Because none of us really like to talk about ego, because we're like, oh no, we're selfless beings, we're so wonderful. But actually, ego is a massive part of this. And one thing Tom and I really, really noticed when we stepped away is that we thought, oh God, everyone's going to be like, oh, it's horrendous. Actually, people are really happy for us. And actually, we thought there was going to be a massive fanfare. People weren't actually that bothered by the fact that we moved away. And so I think as founders, you build this big, big picture that this, you know, everyone's going to be devastated, angry at you. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? You know, some of our staff were really sad, had a few tears. We had some really lovely chats. People were really happy for us, but ultimately it is one part of your life story. It's not the whole entity. It doesn't define you. So have a real think about your ego and how you feel about your organization and yourself and how you're connected. Maybe start to take some of those steps back and maybe start to share some of those decisions with other people, so you're not the core decision maker in certain different ways. I think Tom touched on it already, but about exceptional people. Exceptional people tend to move on. So if you've got people in your organization, then they're not going to be around forever, just like you're not planning on being around forever in the organization. So that's where systems are really, really vital. That governance and systems is really, really key. And again, I think I sort of mentioned it before alongside ego, but letting go. So step back from, check yourself when you think, actually, I am definitely micromanaging right now. Someone else can do this. And Tom also mentioned this as well, but check yourself if you're becoming resentful. Everyone who's here today has probably been thinking about leaving for, I'm going to say, minimum a year. And if you're here today, then starting to put that plan in place for succession planning is really, really vitally important. So you don't get to a space where you are resentful for the organisation that you set up, or feel trapped, or feel bored, or whatever that might be. So actually being here today is a real good step in the right direction to say, okay, well, let's start making a plan to move forward. So those are sort of, I won't go on, there's tons of advice that I could share, and things from our experience that I could share with you all, but I will leave it that in terms of advice. But something that Tom and I want to offer is, when we were going through it, there wasn't anyone to support, there wasn't really anyone to help. And so we are super keen to be able to offer support and advice to other people who are going through the transition from being a founder-led organisation. So we reckon we've probably got space to sort of talk to 5 to 10 charities. So if you'd be interested in having a chat with us, then I'm sure Vic will share our contact details at the end. So yeah, please do just get in touch, and we're really, really happy to sit down and have a chat and tailor make a bit of a plan. I'll help you make a bit of a plan around what you want to do for your next steps. Yeah.
Vic's just asked me to say we're just offering that for free, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Just
yeah,
we're not. So just, you know, we both have full-time jobs, but you know, if we like to try and put back when we can. So do just I'll drop our contact details in there, but if people want an hour of our time to sit and go through where they're at, and if we can help, or just a nugget of advice, then we're happy to jump on a Zoom call and have a cup of tea with you guys. Vic's also messaged just to kind of say to me, just to kind of hone in again on, I know a lot of organizations, East African Playgrounds, we got to 1.5 million turnover, you know, from, I think we started with £70. So we were medium sized when we handed over, but the principles of the handing over are still the same. So getting that governance right, getting the right trustee board. If the trustee board doesn't work without you, then it's not the right one. Again, getting the right systems and processes in place, getting the right strategy in place for moving forward, getting the programs where they actually need to be, so they're functioning without you having to put all the input into them. And the same with the fundraising. If an organization is, I believe some of the organizations here are founder-led, founder-ran, founder is everything. They're the cleaner, the cook, the CEO, everything. The only member of the team. If that is the case, then the hard part is working out whether, as Andrew said, you know, do we carry on? Because if it's just you, then you are everything. That is going to be really hard to carry on and hand it over as its own entity. Or do we look at partnering with another organization? If what you've created is good, it's sustainable with you in it, then that is attractive to other organizations who are looking for projects, who want to grow their impact. East African Playgrounds, we had a lot of opportunities for merging, and we were so niche. You know, playgrounds is very niche in the charity sector, but there were options for us, and we're happy to talk to people. If people want to get on one-on-ones with us, happy to chat about how you can go about identifying and approaching and looking for merge or partner organizations. And for the smaller organizations, it's only a personal belief, but I think merging and partnering is massively the way forward for the long-term sustainability of what some of the organizations will be doing. I'll stop talking now. So over to you, Vic.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tom and Carla. We are going to have a bit of time for Q&A with the whole group, and then my plan was to put us into breakout rooms for the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes. But I'm happy just to keep us together as a group if people feel that would be more useful. I know that's, you know, we've got a reasonably big group size today. So I do want people to feel that they are free to kind of ask questions, and that can be easier in smaller groups. So we'll do a bit of Q&A now, and then I will put us into breakouts for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for the last 5 minutes and share. So Angela, I can see you've got your hand up. Do you want to kick us off with questions for Tom and Carla?
It's a question and comment really. I was a nurse in the NHS, having no intention of doing anything like this. But I happened to see a panorama program in 2005 about maternal deaths in Chad in Central Africa. And I responded to say, you know, what can we do? We ended up actually traveling to Chad, a group of 4 of us, and they actually filmed us. So we were on panorama. And while we were there, we met 2 representatives of the UN who were visiting, because this program was shown in the UN in New York. And they asked whether we would keep in touch with them and let them know how what we were doing was impacting on the numbers of deaths in the hospital. We were providing a range of medications. We raised the money and provided this range of, and the numbers of women dying in the hospital in childbirth absolutely plummeted as a result purely of what we were doing. So we fed this back to the UN, and they wrote to us then in 2007 to say, could we help Liberia and Sierra Leone in the same way? You know, here we were, a little organization run from the back bedroom of my home, and being asked by the UN if we would help. So to cut a very long story short, we're now in 5 countries across Africa, providing this key medication to stop women dying from postpartum hemorrhage, which kills 100,000 women a year. The difficulty we've got is that the organization in London, which manages the medications for us, because we can't physically handle it, they organize it all, we just raise the costs, is that, to their knowledge, what we are doing is absolutely unique. And in the last 6-7 years, we provided enough medication for 1.5 million women to access it free of charge. The difficulty we've had is how do we not have that? If we take this organization out, if we close it down, it's gone. That's it. And I literally have just had a call from the Embassy of Togo in London saying, with a recorded message, can I talk to them about adding Togo to the list? So that uniqueness, it's, in a way, it's lovely. It's great, you know, but at the same time, it's a burden, a lovely burden to have. So we couldn't close. And a few years ago, we nearly closed because we ran out of money.
Angela, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're quite tight on time now. So if you've got a question, could you pose your question for Tom and Carla, please?
Well, it was just about the fact that it is based on me, but at the same time, as I put in the chat, to make myself indispensable is bad management, and I've got to walk away. I have no option. So, but I'm going to remain as a trustee. Do you think that's a good idea?
Well, so much information.
Yeah.
I mean, I could probably give us a call. Let's jump on a call for an hour and we can discuss your individual circumstance, because it's hard to kind of say staying on the board as a trustee wasn't right for us. But isn't to say it's not right for everybody. We felt that we would potentially still be looked at as something important or special, not as not just a trustee, but we would have just been trustees, nothing special. So it depends on the organization, what the people, how, there's so many parameters on that. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're doing amazing work, and the scope of it sounds fantastic. So I'm sure there is a way to make it work so you can hand over, whether that's merging, partnering, or handing over. But feel free to just drop Carla or myself a message, and we can.
Just to add, the trustees and my successor have asked me to stay on for the time being and just see how it goes. And if the time is right to walk away, then that's what I will do. I won't make that decision, they will.
Cool.
Okay. I got broad shoulders.
I'm just going to pause the Q&A for a sec, just to quickly launch a poll, if you don't mind answering it quickly, just because I can see that quite a few people are having to drop off. So before everyone has to shoot, if you could just quickly answer the poll that's popped up, which is about a little bit about kind of how you found the webinar, but also whether you would like to be kind of connected through the FSI with peers for more discussions on this sort of topic, and then we will resume our Q&A. I think we'll just, because the group size is just sort of diminished a bit because a few people have had to drop off and get onto other calls, I think we'll just stay together as a group, if that's all right, because we've also now just got Tom on the call from our guest speakers. And so if I put us into breakout rooms, you'll be stuck with me and none of our speakers. Okay, I'll just give us 10 more seconds to answer that poll if you'd like to. Okay, so there was another hand up, I think, but it seems to have gone down. But if anybody else has a question that they'd like to pose to Tom, go ahead and ask your question. Oh, the hand has come back up. Clara.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm wondering, I don't know how to word this quite right, but I'm wondering, is there ever the case where a founder steps down from their sort of leading role within the organization but still stays on with the organization, so they're not leaving? For example, the charity I work for, we're UK registered, we have a board of trustees here, but our work is done in India, and we have a board of trustees there, and our founder, it's an animal hospital and shelter, and she's a veterinary nurse, so she works at the hospital, she manages our 50 Indian staff, she manages sort of a lot of the fundraising there, she sort of, you know, wears lots of different hats, but essentially what she enjoys doing is managing the actual hospital and working with the animals. And we're looking at a situation where maybe we bring in somebody else who sort of takes sort of over more sort of organizationally, while she is to take some pressure off of her. Is that a thing that sort of anybody has experience of, and can that work, or is there always going to be that feeling of, you know, she's the founder, so she's the one that people sort of go to out of sort of deference and sort of experience?
I have seen it work. I've seen it fail. I've seen it work. I think it wholly relies on two things. One of it is how the team are with that founder. Is that in Uganda they call it the culture of the big man.
Yeah.
Where like everybody's nothing apart from the boss.
Yes.
And like to break that down took us so many years. And so it depends on the staff how they treat the founder and how the founder treats everybody else. So if the founder's willing to just throw their hands up and go, it ain't, I don't, not that I don't care, it's like, that's not a question for me, it's not for me, and just push back all the time to the COO, the CEO, or whoever they bring in, then it can work. But it is really dependent upon the founder. I mean, I would have loved to have stayed in Uganda just building playgrounds. I love digging holes and mixing cement. It's kind of my favorite thing to do. But it really wasn't right for us, for us to stay on. But some organizations, I've seen it where the founder becomes a patron, or they become like the figurehead for fundraising when it's major donors.
Yeah.
Often founders don't want to take the pay cut to do the roles that are below the CEO. But it all depends on that founder.
Yeah, she's not on any great she's on Indian level pay, so it's just really.
Well, then if that's the case, it would all depend on how the staff would react to there being a CEO who's not them, and how they would react to everybody else, and can they funnel everybody away from them so they can just fulfill the requirements of the role they now have. And it's, I can't give the answer on that, but that would be, I don't know if anyone else has got a take on that.
No, it's interesting. It's something we'll have to sort of think on some more, but thank you.
No.
I have a take on it, Tom. I've also seen it. I'm Nasrin, sorry, by the way, I'm not Janine. I lost my link, Vic, and I had to share Janine's link. So there's two Janines on, but we have both registered. I just lost mine, sorry. No worries. So I'm Nasrin, and I founded a charity called Power for the People, which I stepped away from as CEO, and Janine has stepped in last December, and it's working very well for us. I've seen in another charity that we partner with, the founder staying on alongside another person failing, and it depends on two things. I think, as Tom said, it depends on how much that person is seen as a figurehead and is willing to push back towards the CEO. What are CEO decisions really now? And it's not up to them anymore. But also on whether the founder is willing to step down. That's really key, because often, and in this particular case, it was the Board of Trustees who felt that succession planning was in order and the founder really did need to step down. And the founder agreed, but didn't really in their heart, and that didn't work. In our case, I've stepped down as a trustee. I've stepped down as a CEO into a trustee role, and Janine has stepped into the CEO role from a trustee role. So, and I think we try wherever possible for, I think our team's adjusted really well. Janine can feedback on that some more. But anytime there is a sort of question coming to me, it goes back to Janine, because it's not my decision anymore. But what I can do is support. So that's how it works for us. Mm-hmm. And my question earlier, which is why, Vic, you saw the hand up, was in neither of the organizations that have spoken have the founders chosen to stay on as a trustee. And is there a reason for that? How have other people found it? That kind of thing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Do you want me to answer that one? Oh, of course, there's no other guest speakers here. Why I didn't say it? I didn't want to do it anymore. That's the honest truth. You know, 12 years of working in refugee camps, a split life between Uganda and the UK, missing every wedding, birthday, death that happened in 6 months that I wasn't there. If I stayed, I was bringing that organization down. Whereas I left close to the peak. I won't say I left at the peak, because I don't think that's ever true, but I think I was close to the peak. Whether that was close after I went over it or close before it, I'm not sure. But it was just a personal thing for myself and Carla. You know, we'd done our time. We'd done longer than I think we had originally expected we would do. And the organization didn't need us anymore. It didn't need the skills we had and the passion we had for getting it going. It needed a CEO who could then basically keep it going, the mundane stuff, at the same time as someone who was more experienced in asset expansion into multiple countries at the same time. We could have given it a stab, but there's always a better person than you around. There just is. So we realized that, and we pretty sure we found them. Muriel, who took it on, is one of the most exceptional humans I've ever met. So we were pretty happy about that. And it was quite clear she was vastly superior to us. So yeah, it was a personal choice and the right choice, I think.
Andrew, you had a question.
Yeah, Tom, my favourite thing is also digging holes and putting cement in them, putting concrete in them. I don't know quite how I ended up in front of a computer, but that's an aside. Our organisation, one of the key concerns for me is our fundraising. And I've just asked my colleague to assess how much of our income is basically reliant on my wife and I, because the core of our fundraising is our friends and family. And even those big donations, well, for us, big donations that come in are from my mate at university or somebody I met on a train. You know, a high proportion of that income is based on our relationships. And if we go, my concern is, will that money go with us, as it were? You know, will those people still keep supporting the charity? And we're a small organisation. You know, there's 3 of us that share the fundraising, but apart from me, nobody wants to do the fundraising. So, you know, invested in that it's unsustainable, you know, that model, and yet nobody else wants to do the fundraising. You know, how do we break that pattern? How do we ensure that people are supporting the organisation, not the organisation because Andrew and Jane founded it and we love them and they're doing good work and we trust them to do good things with our money?
After you've said this, your bit, Tom, I'll come in on this one as well, just more broadly, because I've actually been in the position of taking over from a founder led organisation. So I might be able to offer some insights from the other side of the table as well. But go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to fundraising, if anything, it's the strategy. Getting that strategy right. And it's okay to have a strategy for what you're doing today, but a strategy where you want to be. If that's not in place, you more likely, if you don't plan it for the next 2 or 3 years, you're more likely to be where you are today in 2 or 3 years than anywhere else. So getting that right as an organization and being honest with the board or the whole team and say, look, I can't do this forever, so we've got to do something about that. So it may be bringing in fundraising consultants, it may be bringing in a full-time fundraiser. I know several people on this call who are absolute beasts at fundraising. So there are people out there who love it, who want to get involved. The second thing is trying to shift the relationship away from you and the funder, as Andrew, for example, and the funder, to the organization and the funder. And absolutely, I mean, I fell foul of my own ego, thinking that when it was, because we work with Ministry of Education and Office of the Prime Minister and DFID and UNICEF and the UNHCR, and I always just presumed it was me. They weren't interested in me at all. We got better contracts, better partnerships when I stepped away and our staff took over, which was quite damaging to my own ego. But it was a really, really important lesson for me to learn early on. Was that the team, they want your organization to succeed because it's just as important to them as it is to you. And if handing those relationships over can be done, and people understand, if your friends are the ones donating, they know you, they love you, they're donating because they love you and they know you, and they'll understand that you can't do this forever. And I'm pretty sure we just didn't have a drop. I don't think we lost any donors when Carla and I left. I can't think of one major donor that did anything other than go, oh, that's a really sensible idea. We probably gained more from doing it than lost. So it's a fear, don't get me wrong. It lived with me until I was proven wrong. But the strategy and getting that in place is really important, and passing on that responsibility, collective responsibility. Sorry, Vic's going to have some way more interesting things to say.
Thank you.
No, I can see Janine's got the real Janine this time has got her hand up. So Janine, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? And if we've got any time, we'll come on to some more kind of broad stuff about building foundations. But if not, I can stay on if we don't have time, I can stay on for a few minutes if anybody else wants to. So go ahead, Janine.
I mean, it wasn't a question as such. I think it was just an observation and a building on some of the conversations that have happened, that have been put forward, and some of what Andrew talked about. I think Nazrin talked about the situation at PFP, and I think what's been, I suppose, in my time previously at the FSI, having worked with lots of small charities, I've seen where founder syndrome has really reared its head. And I've also seen where it can be done really positively. But I think coming from the perspective of the person who has stepped into the CEO role from a founder, I think the things that have really helped in that scenario is Nazrin's already talked about the fact that she wanted to step away from that role. So there was sort of quite a clear, thoughtful plan that went behind it. In fact, I think Nazrin shared with me, she had a one-page spreadsheet of a sort of a 6-month transition plan looking at the different areas of the role and how we were going to have that handover happen. And we were really lucky because I was a trustee for 2 years. So the board knew what they were getting with me, and I also knew what I was getting into. I'd sort of seen the warts and alls, so there weren't surprises as we went into it. And I know that that's a luxury that not everyone will have, but I wonder whether some of those comments that were coming through earlier and questions, sort of thinking about some sort of transitional period and maybe tapering off, you know, the founder CEO's time as you build up the incumbents' time might be helpful. And in terms of the relationships, I think what's helped preserve, or not preserve, but what's helped maintain our relationships is that we have sort of phased the handing over of those as part of the transition plan. But what's been really important for me is that in that handover, the sort of the support and the credibility is built in the handing over of that relationship. And I felt very I suppose, equipped to then be able to take those forwards. And I think it's just that communication that's so vital. So yeah, not a question as such, but just a what's helped.
Thanks, Janine. It's really interesting to hear it from the other side. And we've got about 30 seconds left probably, but if anybody wants to stick around for a couple of minutes, feel free to do so. I'm not in a rush to get off this morning. I realise that people may well have other things that they need to get onto, so if you do need to dash off, then thanks so much for coming and joining us, and I hope you found it useful. I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, throw in like my experience of being part on both sides of this. So I've been the co-founder of a small organisation that I've then moved away from, and I've also been at an organisation where I've taken over from a founder, or sort of taken the organisation from being founder-led. And a lot of the people in the group today are sort of talking about, like, you know, we're very small, I'm a volunteer, and, you know, you may have been listening to some of these case studies thinking like, well, this doesn't really relate to me because these are big organizations with massive budgets and lots of staff. And I think, you know, those organizations that we've heard from today, they started out where you were. And so every organization has, you know, those two organizations have started from sort of zero and worked their way into that position of being able for their founders to move on. And I think the key thing that I've taken away and that I've seen in my own experience is that the organization has to have really solid foundations for the people in the organization not to be critical to its success. And that applies whether your founder wants to stick around for the next 20 years or not at all. You know, if your organization hasn't got really solid foundations, it's not going to be successful in either way. If you haven't got a really solid board of trustees who are leading on governance, if you haven't got processes and systems in place, and if you're not willing to invest time and money on systems and people to get over that hump of always being in starvation mode as an organization, it's going to be really difficult to do this effectively. And so if you're a founder and you're thinking, I want to do this, if you're a member of staff or a volunteer or a trustee who's working with a founder and you want to do this and your organization isn't at that point of having those really solid foundations, that's going to be your first piece of work before you can start to think about this moving on from being founder-led. Your first piece of work is going to be in making sure that the organization has the systems and processes in place that it needs to survive. You know, if your key personnel suddenly downs tools tomorrow and says, do you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, or, you know, heaven forbid there's an accident and they can't, or there's an illness, the organization has to be able to survive. And if it can't in its current state, then you've got some work to do in building those solid foundations. And it could take 6 months, it could take a couple of years. But I suppose we don't want to get to the point where the founders are already exhausted and don't want to do it anymore, but there's 2 years of foundational work that still needs to happen for the founder to be able to exit. And if you're in that position, then my advice would be to go out to the sector and seek help for that transition period. Find somebody who can support you in the interim. And there's lots of free support available. There's like plenty of reasonable cost and affordable support available. There are ways out, but you will have to spend some money and invest some time in it. I think that's my take, is like nothing is really possible without the strong foundations. And I think that's really crucial. Tom?
There was if people don't mind, there was a question Megan wrote down a while ago. I can't see if it was for me or I don't know if Megan is
in
still
the
here.
chat. Oh, sorry, I missed that. Can you still see it?
Are you still here, Megan?
Yeah, I can see you, Megan.
It was asked why I think the question was asked why the partnership we were looking at fell through, and why the partnerships or mergers, they don't happen so often. The answer is ego. Where the reason our merger fell down was it was 2 equally sized organizations And the deal, which is pretty standard in the sector, is one organisation keeps the chair, the trustees merge together, but it's 50-50. One organisation keeps the chair, one organisation keeps the CEO. So East African Playgrounds chair was staying, 50-50 on the board, and we, myself and Carla, were doing a handover and stepping away with the CEO to carry on. It literally got like 2 weeks beforehand, and their chairman decided he didn't want to stand down. That organisation almost folded because of it. It was pretty messy, but it's ego. That's the only way I can describe that. And why they don't necessarily work often is because if it's two organisations and if you're a small organisation and you want to hand over, they work better because the organisation, you are a negative on the balance sheet. Your salary is a negative on the balance sheet. Whereas if you hand over the project, if it's fully funded and there's an excess of funding because your salary is not coming out anymore, that's very attractive to another charity because they gain an extra impact, an extra program, they gain your funding, and they gain a bit of a surplus. Yeah, where it doesn't work is where you have two founders going, let's merge together, and both stay, because then you don't cut down on the overheads and you just share the problem wider. That's my, I haven't written a book about this, but that's my take on, after looking into mergers for the best part of 2 years. I think it's the only way many charities are going to survive the next 5 to 10 years is merging. I think, in my opinion, in the sector, it's something we need to be more open to, especially, if East African Playgrounds tried to merge 5 years earlier. I mean, 5 years before, we were tiny, and it would have been much easier to have merged at that stage with me and Carla holding our hands up and stepping away and handing over fully formed program project with its funding to another organisation. It's not easy, but like I said earlier, nothing worth doing ever is, otherwise everybody would do it. So hopefully, Megan, if you're still there, that answers that question a little bit for you.
So we are obviously over time now. I mean, I feel like the most useful thing for anybody thinking about doing this is to be connected to other people thinking about doing this or having done this. And so in the poll I posted, I asked if you wanted to be connected to a peer. If you're just craving connection, like with this group again, obviously some people shared their email addresses earlier on in the chat, but do let us know. You can email the FSI, you can put in your feedback form that you're wanting to sort of stay connected with this group. And if we get a number of people wanting to do that, then I think one of the most successful ways we can support each other in the sector is to self-organize. And if there are a group of founders who are wanting to do this, why not all come together outside of the confines of this webinar and support each other in doing that? And the FSI, I'm sure, would be very happy to initially facilitate that and share email addresses. And so if you think that would be helpful, then do drop us an email, put it in your feedback, and we'll try to do our best to connect everyone up on that. I feel like we could go on talking for hours longer, but I won't cut into everyone's precious time. Thank you so much, Tom, for sticking around to answer all the questions and for sticking around for an extra 8 minutes. And thank you all as well for being here and for thinking about this. And I think it was Tom that said earlier, the fact that you're here having this discussion and thinking about this means that you're certainly on the right lines in terms of planning ahead for this long game. So thank you all, everyone, for coming. Do keep a lookout for what we've got coming up next. This will be available on demand in a week or so. We'll just get that up on the website so you can share it with colleagues if you want to share it with your founder who is not ready to go. A very subtle way of suggesting that might be the time for them. So yeah, thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and speak to you all sometime soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.